Welcome to Share the Mic. This is a time for conversation between Black and white friends where we get to ask each other questions that we hope will help our communities better understand perspectives, create empathy for people of different colors, and be one more step towards eliminating racism. I'm joined today by Carver Boynton, my associate at Bear Properties and the general manager of the Summit Birmingham. Carver is a graduate of several schools, including the University of Alabama, Faulkner University, and she has a law degree from the Birmingham School of Law. Carver is a native of Selma, Alabama, where she started as the general manager of the Selma Mall 17 plus years ago. She is also a fitness enthusiast who recently succeeded in doing 100 burpees in one session. Welcome, Carver. Can you tell us a bit more first about your background and growing up in Selma and how long it took you to complete those 100 burpees?
Yes, those burpees were a challenge. I think I did somewhere in the nature of like 98 because I had to take a few breaths there. But that was fun. That was a fun day, sort of unexpected. But yeah, I grew up in Selma. Selma's a really interesting place. We're a small community, but we have so much history. Selma is rich in civil rights history, but one of the most interesting things about Selma is that that's kind of like the home base for a lot of people that we read about, we see on TV, that were so active during the civil rights movement. And when they return to Selma, they're very accessible, or they have been in the past very accessible. And so I always encourage people to come back, participate in celebrations, because people that you're reading and seeing on TV, you can really have a real conversation with them. You can really touch them. So that's one of the most exciting things I think about Selma. So yeah.
That's great. So my first question for you today is that it's really about your work. You work in a very white-dominated industry, commercial real estate, which I happen to work in as well, as we're associates. And you manage a property that has a majority of white customers, retailers, and probably vendors as well. So if you could tell us today about an uncomfortable situation where your authority might have been questioned by a consumer, store manager, or vendor due to being Black, and how you handled that.
Yeah, so, first off, as you mentioned, I've been doing this for about 17 or more years. So I've had a number of occasions as an African American and as a woman in a male-dominated industry to have my authority challenged. Particularly when you're dealing with vendors who are construction-based, it's or maintenance based. It's just not, unfortunately, not an uncommon experience. And being African American, it adds to, are you who you really say you are? So one of the things that's interesting about that experience is that I recognized very early that I didn't have the luxury that some of my peers and colleagues have to be more casual in their roles. When I show up, I have to show up as the GM every time, because almost every time my authority can be easily challenged if I don't fit what the idea of the general manager can be. So I can't show up in the tennis shoes and the jeans. I can't show up casual. If it's a casual environment, like my what I mean by that, if a comfortable environment, like my office and or the corporate office where I know people and they know who I am, then that's different. But when I'm dealing with customers, managers, consumers, particularly when I'm handling challenging issues, not only do I have to act the part, be the part, which is expected and obviously what I get paid for, but I always have to look the part. So there's never an opportunity to relax in this role, and that's just not. That's really not the experience of my other colleagues. They can be laid back, they can be more casual, they can be funnier. That's not a freedom I'm often afforded being African American in a position like this.
And then that adds more stress, more time, preparation. I think it's tiring in some ways. I've experienced that as well as a female, obviously in a leadership position and an executive position, and felt that same way. But of recent, it's become more relaxed for us here, and I hope that happens for you as well,
You
Carver.
have to be on all the time, and if you're not on, then your authority often is questioned, because when I show up, I'm unexpected. I am not what people expect, and so naturally I'm not always what people believe that I am who I say I am. So I have to make sure in every aspect that they understand that.
Well, that's something we need to work to change, isn't it? Okay. So you have a question for me.
So my first question for you is, we witnessed the egregious deaths of Ahmaud Arbery and George Floyd, and now the shooting of Jacob Blake, all of which have sparked a series of protests, very peaceful protests often. But what peaceful protests often come outside agitators that seek to damage commercial property. The two groups are not the same. We know that. But they have very different agendas, but they are very often confused to be the same with the same agenda. As the president of a company that manages the very property that's vulnerable, how do you balance the responsibility to protect your centers, your retailers, the centers from physical damage with your passion to support the agenda of the peaceful protest?
It's interesting, this question, because you really have experienced the same thing of recent, being the manager at the Summit Birmingham, and some of the protests, could have ended up there. So I think you get exactly where I'm going. Yeah. We do have a commercial project in downtown Birmingham, the Pizzets, and it sits in an area where the protests turned actually into more violent looting, and a good bit of that occurred. And there was a great deal of damage. But we were fortunate to come out of that night unscathed. And I give that to prayer, because I was praying for that building and the situation, and for the people that were protesting as well. But a few days later, I was in Atlanta on a business trip, and a friend working on an adjacent property called me and said, these protests are starting back up, Libby, and it's probably going to hit the Pizzets, and there are likely going to be some white supremacists coming to Birmingham to cause trouble. So I was very, very concerned and knew that we had to call, to action. And so, our building is historic, even harder maybe to repair than many, many others. And, I knew we were at risk. So I did what I think anyone in my position would do, and that is just call to action every resource that I knew that could help us protect the building in a very short period of time, because it was going to happen that night. So we pulled together the materials, the manpower to erect a rather large wooden barricade, almost the size of a city block. And we had help from friends, including my husband, the Dobbins Group, and his partners, Bill Dobbins, Creature, the contractor architect that was working on the building next door, Capstone Building provided the wood. And we, in 6 hours, had this mammoth barricade built, or they did. I didn't do anything but make the phone calls. That happened the same day. Coincidentally, that late afternoon, there was going to be a protest planned for my own community where I live. So I'm on the phone, driving back from Atlanta, calling, everybody I knew, fast signs, and tried to get these 15 signs made that said, "Let equality bloom, Black Lives Matter," and a beautiful image on those signs. And paid a premium to get them made, and I took them with me to the rally after I had just been to the Pizzets to check on the barricade, and then held my sign up proudly at that rally, and I gave all 15 of those signs away to people that walked up to me and said, "This sign is so perfect for this moment. Could I have one? And I said, you can have one of these signs as long as you commit to me that you will put that in your yard and display it proudly. And of course, each and every person did. So, I'm very public about my opinions in support of the movement of Black Lives Matter. And that's a controversial movement for a lot of people, because, but I believe in it because they're bringing awareness to the public. We can no longer ignore the violence. We should have never ignored it. But, the abuse that has happened to people of color, it's just wrong. The evidence today is indisputable. The public outcry is something that I plan to continue to participate in, and I hope to be an example for others to join. So, kind of to wrap up, as Birmingham began cleaning up from the looting and many of the barricades were being painted downtown, again, our team here at Bear just engaged very quickly and said, what can we do to support the movement? And so we sponsored an event, again, very last minute, pulled together, that showed our support publicly for our city and people of color. And hundreds of people came out first to see the barricades downtown, but then they ended up at the Pizettes. And they put these handprints. We had them in all different colors of paint, and they could mix them and match them. And kids were there, and it was just this incredible event where multicolored handprints went up on this gigantic barricade in a rainbow of colors within these black hearts that were pre-painted. And the most special moment for me was that when I was helping these young kids, a group of young kids, mixed families, all different colors and races, and they had their paint stained hands cleaning up in the water buckets we were using. And they were all side by side with their hands in the bucket, smiling, laughing, black, white, red-haired, light brown, just this beautiful mix of colors. So diverse, and they're sharing in the fun and enjoying each other. And this mother started crying, and she just said, this is so beautiful. This is what our society should look like. And that was a special moment that I'm proud that we could play a part in downtown Birmingham. Yeah. So go ahead, Carver.
I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt. I just want to say, I think that we with your leadership, we did that well. I think Birmingham did that well. I think there was such an opportunity there that, that could have gone in a lot of directions. Putting up a wooden barricade over your store or business can easily feel like we want to push you out. So figuring out how to make that inviting while balancing the protection of the property, it was such a great idea. But, more than anything, you being who you are, people knowing that, understanding your position, you not apologizing for that, in your support of, what can be seen in some communities as controversial. I don't necessarily think that is, but I think that I take that position because I have a large understanding. But I appreciate just kind of who you are and even what you're doing here today. Like, I think this is what matters, and I think you've done just an amazing job, and I think it makes the difference in balancing, the roles that you have. So thank you for that.
Well, thank you, Carver. I appreciate that. My next question for you is something that we share. You're a very active CrossFit athlete. And, one of the things about CrossFit that's great is that the gyms, or boxes as they're known, are typically a tight community of friends. And I'm really curious as to how the news of Greg Glassman's insensitive and racist comments affected you and your fellow athletes at the gym where you work out. Did it drive positive conversations towards change? And if not, how did that make you feel?
Yeah, it's really interesting. It did. So for a short answer, yes, absolutely. And those conversations are continuing. So that's the good outcome there. So my gym owners brought it to my attention before I read it online, and they were outraged. It was really interesting because while we both thought those comments were very insensitive, I can think of a lot of words. They're just uninformed, insensitive, lack of empathy towards a whole race of people and a whole cross-section of the community. Their response was anger. My response was disappointment. We had already dropped our CrossFit affiliation, so we weren't technically deemed as a CrossFit gym, but we still held CF on a number of our logos and things of that sort. Immediately, they wanted to change that. Immediately, they wanted a sheer, complete disassociation from the organization or the industry in and of itself. And actually, I remember the conversation we had because it was funny. I stopped by their house just casually, and we got into, they were like, "Did you see what happened today?" And I was like, "Oh, what happened today?" So, and I remember them saying, "We're done, we're painting this." And I was like, "Well, hold on. Let's see what happens here." I said that. But that's because I'm accustomed to this position. As unfortunate as it is, it's not all that rare. People don't understand the purpose behind Black Lives Matter. They don't understand, and it is just amazing to me that you can't, but you really don't understand the outrage from the death of George Floyd. And I think that what visually, seeing the murder of Ahmaud Arbery, seeing the murder of George Floyd, seeing this shooting and understanding, you can't deny what's before you visibly, has yielded far more interest and empathy and understanding for what maybe Black Lives Matter or police reform has, what those groups have called for, what the community has been calling for, or the constant, repeated, systematic injustices and racism that's experienced in the Black community when confronted with just kind of doing everyday tasks in life. Compared to how the police may handle a situation with, a white person. So I think that that it was far too common of a position. Disappointed was my response. But what I appreciate in my gym owners is that, I appreciate and respect, they were outraged and immediately wanted to talk about it and understand where I was and appreciate my role and make sure that they were being respectful of, who I am, my community, and things of that sort. So I think it did yield a lot of healing and understanding.
And that was the appropriate response, truly. So what a great example that they are.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, okay, so my next question for you is that, you are an outspoken advocate for a diverse section of the community. And your financial positioning affords you, and I imagine many people protection from injustices that we're talking about here and that are experienced by a certain class of people and race of people. How do you have the conversation with those friends, similar to the conversations that we're having now? How do you have those conversations with those friends to bridge understanding about what's happening around us, particularly when they simply don't have a frame of reference for these experiences?
Well, this is kind of a hard one because a lot of people are not open-minded, even still with everything that's happened. But first, you've got to be vulnerable. I have to be vulnerable, and I can't worry about what a friend will think of me when I speak about these issues. One thing, though, on that is that we have to speak with and not to our friends because, they probably, some do not have an open frame of reference. So first, it means being willing to have the conversation. It's an uncomfortable conversation, whether it's at the dinner table with our own families, with friends, coworkers, at the gym, the very conversations you were having. Also within the church, and lastly, publicly in forums like this. So being vulnerable and being willing to talk about these issues and to show that I have empathy, that I believe that systemic racism is real and it's a problem that has to be dealt with. But I have to do it in the right way. I have learned that. So making people feel like they are the enemy, it doesn't work. Although there's judgment there, surely when you have the conversations internally, externally, that probably shouldn't happen. Causing them to feel guilty and defensive is an obstacle to change. So we have to realize that. One way that's really easy is just by sharing videos with friends. Like my favorite one, I talk about this, I think, in every episode, Uncomfortable Conversations with a Black Man. That's a very easy way to share with someone that it may be hard to have the conversation, or even when you've had it, you didn't make any progress. So I used the one episode with Carl Lentz of Hillsong that Emmanuel Acho interviewed. And so a lot of Christians that may be far right, that don't have that perspective or empathy, when they see a leader, a Christian leader in New York City, talking about it, out protesting with Black Lives Matter, which again in itself from the Christian community is very, very controversial because of their creed. But that maybe opens a door and they get a little more curious and want to have that conversation. So that's actually a way to open conversation. And then I think having this conversation with you today, Carver, on Share the Mic. This is something I'm sharing with my friends via social media, and this is our 4th show. And people seeing Black and white friends talking about these issues in a non-threatening way, just talking openly and honestly, and hopefully our friends that we share with will share with others via their social media platforms, podcast or YouTube. So, interesting point. Our first episode with Dimitri Carpenter had over 1,000 views. So that to me was a good start. My hope is that people that follow me on social media, they'll observe these healthy conversations and relationships between people of different colors, and it will bridge understanding and create empathy. So my next question for you, Carver, is a 2-part question. I get to do 2 parts because you did that. You're giving me one of those. So again, going back to Selma, you have a family history of civil rights activism. In fact, your grandmother, Amelia Boynton Robinson, was one of the marchers that walked across the Edmund Pettus Bridge with MLK and John Lewis. Can you tell us about your grandmother, how she told you about that experience? Or in other words, how she explained those events to you when you were a child?
Yeah, so I think first of all, I'd like to point out it was a peaceful protest. It started off as a peaceful protest, but it wasn't peaceful. She wasn't peaceful. First there's some very famous footage of her beaten at the foot of the bridge from the first attempt of the march, where she was left there to die, beaten and unconscious. And it wasn't, along with other marchers, and the response from the community was, obviously to send help. And, the officials at the time, the mayor at the time, he flat out refused to send help to the marchers. They were left to die. And it was not until the community said, we will burn Selma down if you don't send help. Did they get a response where help was sent to, retrieve the marchers that had been beaten and left by state troopers, mind you. Let's say by state troopers on horses with billy clubs. So the first march, very much in an attempt to make a peaceful protest, turned into something very different.
And clearly the authorities, it was going to be violent from their perspective as well.
Absolutely. And as a response to that, my grandmother, she was an amazing woman. Her legacy is tremendous. As a member of the Courageous Eight, she invited MLK to Selma thereafter that, because he was not a part of the first march. She was then invited to Selma after that to help march. But the organizing of these events were going on before he arrived. She was a part of that. The first Voting Rights Act was drafted in her home along with her and Martin Luther King and other legislators.
That's amazing.
She was the first Democratic woman She was the first black woman and the first woman of any color to run on the Democratic ticket for U.S. Congress in the state of Alabama. So that position is now held by Terry Sewell, and very often Terry speaks of her. So one of the significant things about her legacy, because I could go on and on and on with her accomplishments, is that she really spoke all over the world about the model of the civil rights movement and took that to other countries to speak to them about fighting for democracy and against injustices in their countries all over the world, almost up into her death. And so what I remember most is her saying 3 points. One is that this is a human rights issue, and it stems well beyond just what happens in Selma, and we have to deal with what's in our community, but we take those messages globally and bond with our brothers and sisters across the water, and help promoting democracy there, because as long as they are experiencing the same thing, no one is free.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
And so she was able to witness what happened with Nelson Mandela and apartheid in South Africa.
Yeah, so and so her legacy and her reach was amazing. Her promotion of youth was always what was encouraged, and she was known for the saying, "Get off my shoulders." And what she meant by that is that don't rest here. There is so much more work to be done. We have to keep pushing. And she was passionate about influencing youth to move forward in doing that work.
Has it made you bolder, your grandmother, in today's events?
It certainly has invited me into forums to speak about the parallels about the civil rights movement from the past with what we see today. It's I think I don't think necessarily my grandmother. I think what's happening in our community. I always say there's a little activist in us all, right? Like somebody asked me if I was an activist, and I was like, yeah, I think we all are. And I think that what's happening right now cannot be ignored in a way where it just excites and invites a level of action, of whether it's conversation in your community, whether it's peaceful protests, whether it's being in these forms and settings and having conversations with friends. I have friends that I turn on CNN, and I have friends that I probably don't go a day without seeing them on, because they're everywhere talking about experiences and how things need to move forward and what we need to do specifically to shift that and change and yield healing and understanding, because you have to have a level of understanding, a frame of reference, an understanding, an ear for empathy to really get to the healing, right? So I've been positioned as a result of my grandmother and what's happening today. I'm very fortunate to be asked to talk about it, and I've been positioned to do so. I think that's what I see more than anything.
So thanks for being here today.
Yeah, thank you for having me. Thank you for doing this. So my final question for you, 2 parts also. In this country's current climate, do you think businesses have a responsibility to promote empathy and encourage healing among races? And if so, what do you think that looks like for the business? And second part is, how would you, and you kind of touched on this, how would you encourage other similarly positioned professionals like yourself to promote that same empathy and encourage healing within their respective roles?
So as a leader of a company, I personally feel responsible to do that, promote empathy and encourage healing. Yeah, but we cannot force empathy on businesses. What we can do is we can educate people, our associates especially, within our business, so that their eyes in general are open to systemic racism and the horrors of our past. But I'm part of a team, and as outspoken as I can be about these issues, I have to build support and consensus at all levels, as it's likely that everyone does not feel as strongly about these issues as I do. So let me point out that I do not own this company that I work for. But I have a leadership position, and I can use my influence and our company's core values, do the right thing to affect change. So, we recently formed a group that you, Carver, are part of called IDEA to focus on how we are going to enact concrete change. So IDEA stands for inclusion, diversity, equity, meaning a level playing field, and awareness. And it's kind of interesting as I read your questions, I thought we could use the E in the E of IDEA to also mean empathy. It's so important, as I believe empathy is the beginning to the road of healing. So we've asked as diverse a group as possible to be on the team, and the purpose of the group is to generate ideas and create concrete steps that will enact real change. Not just say we're going to do something, but doing something. So we're starting by having honest discussions together on diversity issues, and we're setting actionable goals. We had a meeting yesterday, and that was the number one thing our leaders said, actionable goals that are measurable and that we can be accountable to. So just some examples, being intentional about spreading a wider wingspan in recruiting from HBCUs. That was a big focus, and we have a very specific goal on that. Education, again, yielding empathy. I talked about sharing videos, but like an example, I'm a huge proponent that everyone at our company should visit the EJI in Montgomery as well as the memorial. And I hope that we do that we come to terms and we're able to figure that out after COVID. But I know I haven't witnessed anything that could bring empathy to the issues Black people have experienced. And I was already an advocate before I went there, but it was so moving. I don't think anyone could go there and not be moved and have empathy. You would just be the coldest person on earth if that were the case. So a field trip for associates to this museum and monument, I think, would be really revealing. And it's something that I'm going to encourage and that we accomplish. So, there are many initiatives, but we've really got to work. We've started working on this, and I'm admitting that. And so there's more to come as it evolves, but I think getting started was important. And we've done that, and I want to use that in this forum and other forums with other leaders as an example that others can replicate.
I love that. I think that's wonderful, and I'm so thankful that you invited me here today and to be a part of the start of a shifting in this company. I think that's so important. Yeah.
Carver, it's really been a pleasure having you as my guest on Share the Mic. I think we could do this 30 times and not get to everything that I would love to talk about. So we'll do that in the hope. How does that sound?
Absolutely. I welcome that. Thank you so much for asking me to be a part.
And to our listeners and those watching, please do just that. Share this post, share the mic with others via video, podcast, so we can keep this conversation front and center. Let's work together towards eliminating racism. Thanks for tuning in. Share the Mic was recorded at Magnolia Studios in Birmingham, Alabama. Co-production, recording, videography, and editing are by Ronnie Gadtree. Share the Mic was created and produced by me, Libby Lassiter, with the help of my many Black and white friends.